but the path to that dream seemed insurmountable. The art world, he quickly learned, was rife with systemic barriers. Prestigious galleries often catered to a select elite, their rosters filled with artists who had attended top art schools or had influential connections. Elijah, a young black man from a struggling neighborhood, didn't fit the mold. One particularly disheartening encounter happened at a local gallery's open call. Elijah had arrived with his portfolio, a collection of vibrant and heartfelt pieces he had spent months curating. The receptionist barely glanced at him before handing him a form and telling him to wait. Hours passed, and when it was finally his turn, the gallery representative dismissed his work with a perfunctory glance. "This isn't what we're looking for," she said, her tone clipped. "Your style is too raw. It lacks sophistication." Elijah walked out, his portfolio tucked under his arm and his heart heavy. But even as self-doubt threatened to consume him, he clung to his mother's words. He couldn't let the world dim his light. Creating despite the odds. Back in his apartment, Elijah painted with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his art didn't need to fit into anyone else's mold. His work wasn't about sophistication or trends, it was about truth. He captured the laughter of children, the sorrow of loss, the quiet moments of joy that punctuated the chaos of life. Each stroke of his brush was a defiant declaration: "I am here. I matter." To make ends meet, Elijah took on a string of odd jobs, bartending, delivering groceries, even working as a janitor. Every spare moment was spent painting. His tiny apartment became a kaleidoscope of color, canvases stacked against the walls, the scent of turpentine lingering in the air. He started sharing his process on social media, recording time-lapse videos of his work and writing heartfelt captions about the stories behind each piece. Slowly, he began to build a small but dedicated following. People from all over the world resonated with the raw emotion in his art, leaving comments like, "This reminds me of my childhood," or "Your work speaks to my soul." But Elijah knew that online validation wasn't enough to break into the traditional art world. He needed to find someone who believed in his vision, someone who could open the doors that had long been closed to him. The spark of hope. One night, as Elijah stared out of his apartment window at the city lights, he made himself a promise: he would keep going, no matter how many rejections he faced. The art world might not be ready for him yet, but he would make them see him. His story, his truth, his light, it was worth fighting for. Little did he know, his persistence would soon set the stage for a life-changing encounter that would propel him from obscurity to a place he had only dreamed of. The fateful encounter. Elijah Harris stood outside the imposing glass doors of Galerie Leclerc, a high-end art gallery in the heart of Chicago's affluent downtown district. His portfolio, a carefully curated collection of his most heartfelt pieces, felt heavier in his hands than usual. The elegant facade of the gallery, with its pristine white walls and minimalist signage, made him hesitate. But he shook off the creeping doubt and whispered to himself, "You've come this far. Don't stop now." For weeks, Elijah had researched the gallery. Galerie Leclerc was renowned for showcasing emerging talent, often discovering artists who went on to achieve global fame. Its owner, Lawrence Whitaker, was a powerful figure in the art world, known for his discerning eye and his notoriously difficult personality. Despite the odds, Elijah had managed to secure a brief appointment, thanks to relentless follow-ups and the faintest spark of interest from an assistant who had glanced at his online portfolio. Stepping into a different world. As Elijah entered, he was struck by the stark contrast between his world and this one. The gallery was a sanctuary of quiet opulence, with polished marble floors, ambient lighting, and carefully spaced canvases that seemed to demand reverence. A handful of well-dressed patrons wandered the space, sipping champagne and murmuring in hushed tones. Elijah approached the receptionist, a sharp-featured woman dressed in black, who barely glanced up as he introduced himself. "I'm here for an appointment with Mr. Whitaker," he said, trying to sound confident. She raised an eyebrow, her gaze flickering to his paint-stained hands and thrift store blazer. "Wait here," she said curtly, before disappearing into the back. Minutes later, a tall, silver-haired man emerged, his tailored suit and air of superiority making it clear that he was Lawrence Whitaker. He paused when he saw Elijah, his expression immediately shifting to one of mild distaste. "You're the artist?" Lawrence asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yes, sir. My name is Elijah Harris," Elijah replied, extending a hand. Lawrence ignored the gesture, instead motioning for Elijah to follow him into a side room. Dismissal without a glance. The room was a small conference area, its walls lined with black and white photographs of previous gallery exhibitions. Elijah carefully set his portfolio on the table and opened it, revealing a collection of vibrant, emotionally charged pieces. Each one told a story, a mother's resilience, a community's struggles, a young boy's dreams. "I've been following your gallery for years," Elijah began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I think my work could resonate with your audience." Lawrence barely glanced at the first piece before shutting the portfolio with a loud snap. "No need," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't the type of work we represent." Elijah blinked, confused. "You haven't really looked at them yet." "I believe." "I've seen enough," Lawrence interrupted, his tone sharp. "This style might work in a street fair or a community center, but not here. Gallery Leclerc caters to a more sophisticated clientele. We're looking for refinement, originality, not whatever this is." Elijah felt the sting of Lawrence's words, but it was what came next that truly cut deep. The sting of prejudice. Lawrence folded his arms, his gaze narrowing as he took in Elijah's appearance. "Listen," he said with a sigh, "I admire your enthusiasm, but you're clearly inexperienced. Your presentation is unpolished, your work lacks cohesion, and frankly, you don't fit the image of an artist who belongs here." Elijah's jaw tightened. "What exactly do you mean by image?" Lawrence smirked. "You know exactly what I mean. Look around, this isn't a place for amateurs. Maybe if you cleaned up, got a formal education, and learned how the art world operates, you'd have a chance. But right now? No." The room felt suffocating. Elijah's chest tightened with a mix of anger and humiliation. He could feel the weight of Lawrence's condescension pressing down on him, reminding him of every rejection he'd faced, every door slammed in his face. A vow to prove himself. Without another word, Elijah gathered his portfolio and stood. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady when he said, "Thank you for your time, Mr. Whitaker. I'll remember this moment." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you will. Good luck, wherever you end up." As Elijah stepped out of the gallery and into the bustling city streets, the humiliation he'd felt began to morph into determination. The rejection wasn't new, but Lawrence's outright dismissal, and the subtle prejudice laced in his words, lit a fire within him. Standing on the sidewalk, Elijah looked back at the gallery's gleaming facade. It was a symbol of everything he was fighting against: elitism, exclusion, and the idea that talent had to fit into narrow, predefined molds. "I'll prove him wrong," Elijah muttered to himself. "Not just for me, but for every artist who's ever been told they don't belong." With that vow, he turned and walked away, his head held high. Little did Lawrence know, the artist he had dismissed so easily was on the brink of a journey that would turn the art world, and Lawrence's own life, upside down. A hidden champion. Elijah Harris stood nervously in the small, crowded hall of the community center. Around him, makeshift stalls displayed everything from handcrafted jewelry to paintings and sculptures. It was a local art event, not glamorous by any means, but one that gave him a glimmer of hope. These gatherings were his only chance to showcase his work, to find someone who might see the stories and emotions he poured into every brushstroke. His stall was modest, featuring a dozen carefully chosen pieces. The centerpiece was his mother's portrait, surrounded by paintings of children laughing in alleys, sunsets over graffiti-covered walls, and quiet moments of resilience and hope. While others might see chaos in his work, Elijah saw life, a life worth celebrating despite its hardships. As the evening progressed, passers-by stopped to admire his paintings, some commenting on their vibrancy, but few made purchases. Elijah couldn't shake the memory of Lawrence Whitaker's harsh words. Maybe my work is too raw, too different for people to appreciate. Meeting Sophia. Just as Elijah was beginning to pack up, a woman approached his stall. She was elegant yet approachable, dressed in a flowing scarf and tailored coat that gave her an air of understated sophistication. Her sharp, discerning eyes scanned the paintings with genuine interest, lingering on the portrait of his mother. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice warm and confident. The depth of emotion in her eyes, it's as if she's alive. Elijah hesitated, unsure if she was serious or just being polite. "Thank you," he replied. "It's my mom. She's the reason I started painting." The woman smiled, extending a hand. "I'm Sophia Rousseau. I collect art, and I've curated exhibitions around the world." "And you are?" "Elijah Harris," he said, shaking her hand. "I'm just trying to make my way." Sophia tilted her head, studying him as if he were one of his own paintings. "Elijah, you're more than just trying. Your work has a voice this world needs to hear." A mentor in Sophia. Over the next few weeks, Sophia became a guiding light in Elijah's life. She invited him to her studio, a sprawling loft filled with art from every corner of the globe. Paintings, sculptures, and photographs adorned the walls, each piece telling its own story. Sophia wasted no time introducing Elijah to the intricacies of the art market. She taught him about pricing his work, the importance of building a personal brand, and the value of networking with the right people. She also helped him refine his portfolio, encouraging him to focus on pieces that showcased his unique perspective. "Art isn't just about talent," Sophia explained one afternoon as they sipped tea in her studio. "It's about connection. People need to see themselves in your work, to feel something they didn't know they were missing. You have that gift, Elijah. Now, we just need to show the world." Sophia's belief in him was transformative. For the first time, Elijah felt seen, not as an outsider or a struggling artist, but as someone with potential. She began inviting him to exclusive art events, introducing him to collectors and gallery owners who were intrigued by her endorsement. Gaining traction. The first big breakthrough came when one of Elijah's paintings sold at a private auction for several $1,000s, more money than he had ever made from his art. The buyer, a prominent collector, praised the raw emotion and authenticity in his work, describing it as a breath of fresh air in an industry that often feels stagnant. Word spread quickly within the art community. Sophia's network of influential buyers began to take notice of Elijah's work, and his paintings started selling at increasing prices. His use of vibrant colors and the raw, unfiltered emotions in his pieces captivated audiences, standing out in a world often dominated by abstract concepts and technical precision. As his reputation grew, Elijah's confidence blossomed. He rented a proper studio space, allowing him to work on larger canvases and experiment with new techniques. Each piece told a story of resilience, community, and hope, stories that resonated deeply with his growing audience. The magazine feature. The turning point came when a prominent art magazine, Canvas and Culture, reached out for an interview. They had heard about Elijah through Sophia and were intrigued by his journey from the streets of Chicago to becoming a rising star in the art world. The interview was deeply personal, with Elijah sharing his struggles, his inspirations, and the pivotal role his mother played in shaping his path. The accompanying photos showcased his work in stunning detail, capturing the vibrancy and emotion that defined his style. When the article was published, it went viral within the art community. Social media buzzed with praise for Elijah's talent and perseverance. Collectors who had overlooked him in the past suddenly wanted to own a piece of his story. Galleries began reaching out, eager to showcase his work. For Elijah, the recognition was overwhelming but deeply gratifying. It wasn't just about the fame or the money, it was about proving to himself and the world that his voice mattered. A rising star. Elijah's paintings continued to sell for record prices, with some pieces fetching tens of thousands of dollars. He remained grounded, dedicating a portion of his earnings to community programs that supported young, aspiring artists from underprivileged backgrounds. He knew firsthand how difficult it was to break into the art world without the right resources or connections. Through it all, Sophia remained by his side, offering guidance and encouragement. "You've come a long way, Elijah," she said during one of their meetings. "But this is just the beginning. Your story, and your work, has the power to change lives." Elijah nodded, a smile breaking across his face. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not just in the art world, but in a world that had once seemed so determined to shut him out. What he didn't know was that his newfound success would soon bring him face to face with the very man who had dismissed him as unworthy. Poetic justice. The gleaming facade of Galerie Leclerc no longer shone with the luster it once held. Lawrence Whitaker, the gallery's owner, stood in the middle of the main exhibition hall, surveying the nearly empty space. The crowd that used to flock to his gallery had dwindled over the past year. The art world was changing, and he was struggling to keep up. The rise of diverse, emerging artists had shifted the industry's focus. Collectors and galleries were increasingly interested in works that told authentic stories, works created by artists from underrepresented backgrounds. Lawrence, who had built his reputation by catering to an elite, traditional clientele, found himself woefully out of touch. The gallery's decline. To make matters worse, several of his top artists had moved on to galleries with a more modern and inclusive approach. Sales had plummeted, and Lawrence's once flourishing business was hemorrhaging money. He knew he needed a lifeline, an investor who could inject much-needed capital into the gallery. But finding such an investor proved difficult. His reputation as an elitist and his unwillingness to embrace the changing tides of the art world had left him isolated. Desperation began to creep in as bills piled up and creditors started calling. One day, Lawrence received an email that seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. An anonymous investor, intrigued by the gallery's legacy, expressed interest in acquiring a majority stake. The investor proposed a meeting to discuss terms, and Lawrence, eager for any opportunity, quickly agreed. Elijah's plan. Meanwhile, Elijah Harris sat in his expansive new studio, a world away from the tiny apartment where his journey had begun. His career had skyrocketed, with his paintings featured in major exhibitions across the globe. He had become a symbol of perseverance, his story inspiring countless others. But Elijah hadn't forgotten where he came from, or the obstacles he had faced along the way. He was determined to use his success to create opportunities for other underrepresented artists. As part of this mission, he decided to invest in galleries that would prioritize diversity and inclusion. When Elijah heard about Lawrence's struggling gallery, he couldn't help but think back to their encounter. The memory of Lawrence's condescending words and dismissive attitude still stung, but Elijah saw an opportunity for poetic justice. He contacted Lawrence under the guise of an anonymous investor, careful not to reveal his identity. The meeting. The day of the meeting arrived, and Lawrence sat in his office, nervously straightening his tie. The gallery's financial future depended on this investor's decision. When the door opened, Lawrence stood to greet his guest, his practiced smile faltering as he took in the man standing before him. "Elijah Harris," Elijah said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." Lawrence's face turned pale as recognition dawned. He stammered, searching for words, but Elijah's calm demeanor left him at a loss. You're the investor?" "I am," Elijah said, taking a seat. "And I'd like to talk about the future of Galerie Leclerc." The revelation. Lawrence's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. The artist he had once dismissed as unworthy was now sitting across from him, not as a hopeful dreamer, but as a wealthy, respected figure in the art world. It was a bitter pill to swallow. "I'll admit, this is unexpected," Lawrence said, his voice strained. "You've done well for yourself." Elijah's smile didn't waver. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but I've been fortunate to meet people who believed in me, even when others didn't." Lawrence's cheeks flushed with shame. He knew exactly what Elijah was implying. "About our last meeting," he began, "Don't bother," Elijah interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "I didn't come here for an apology. I came here because I believe Gallery Leclerc has potential, if it's willing to change. The deal. Elijah laid out his proposal. He would purchase the gallery outright and rebrand it as a space dedicated to showcasing diverse, emerging artists. Lawrence could stay on as a consultant, but the gallery's direction would be entirely in Elijah's hands. Lawrence hesitated, pride warring with practicality. He knew he had no other options. "You've clearly thought this through," he said finally. "And I admit, the gallery needs a fresh perspective." "It's more than a perspective," Elijah replied. "It's a mission. Art should reflect the world in all its diversity. I want this gallery to be a place where everyone feels they belong." Reluctantly, Lawrence agreed to the terms. The deal was finalized within weeks, and Gallery Leclerc was reborn under a new name, the Resilience Gallery. The transformation. Under Elijah's leadership, the gallery became a beacon for underrepresented artists. Its exhibitions featured works that told powerful, authentic stories, drawing in crowds from all walks of life. The once empty hall was now filled with vibrant energy, and sales soared. Lawrence, though initially resistant to the changes, found himself humbled and inspired by the artists he once overlooked. Working alongside Elijah, he began to see the value in embracing new perspectives. Full circle. At the gallery's grand reopening, Elijah stood before a packed crowd, his heart full as he addressed the audience. "This space isn't just about art," he said. "It's about creating opportunities, breaking barriers, and celebrating the voices that too often go unheard." As the crowd erupted in applause, Elijah caught Lawrence's eye. The former gallery owner nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson he had learned. Elijah smiled, knowing that his journey had come full circle. What began as a rejection had become a triumph, not just for him, but for countless others who would now have a chance to shine. Redemption and reflection. The sun cast a warm glow over the Resilience Gallery, its glass facade reflecting the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Inside, the space was alive with vibrant artwork, laughter, and conversation. Artists, collectors, and community members gathered to celebrate the gallery's first anniversary under Elijah Harris's leadership. In one corner of the gallery, Lawrence Whitaker stood quietly, observing the scene. He was no longer the proud, untouchable gallery owner he once was. Time and circumstances had humbled him, and tonight, he felt the weight of his past choices more acutely than ever. A moment of reflection. Lawrence watched as guests admired the work of emerging artists, many of whom might never have had the chance to exhibit their pieces without Elijah's vision. The walls were adorned with art that told stories of struggle, hope, and resilience, each piece a testament to the power of diverse voices. He remembered the young artist who had stood before him years ago, hopeful and determined, only to be dismissed without a second thought. It was a memory Lawrence couldn't erase, and one he now deeply regretted. As Elijah approached, Lawrence straightened, unsure of what to say. "The gallery looks incredible," he began awkwardly. "You've done something truly remarkable here." Elijah nodded, his expression kind but measured. "Thank you, Lawrence. It's been a long journey, but worth every step." There was a pause before Lawrence spoke again, his voice tinged with genuine remorse. "Elijah, I owe you an apology. I was wrong to dismiss you, to dismiss your talent and your vision. My arrogance blinded me to what truly matters in art, and in people." Elijah studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." A role in the rebranded gallery. The conversation shifted as Elijah shared his plans for the gallery's future. "I want this place to be more than just a gallery," he said. "I want it to be a platform for change, a place where artists who've been overlooked can find their voice." Lawrence nodded, his admiration for Elijah growing. "You're creating something I never could. If there's any way I can help, I'd like to." Elijah's smile widened. "Actually, there is. You've spent decades in the art world, and your knowledge could be invaluable. How would you feel about curating exhibitions that focus on diverse artists? It's time to use that experience to uplift others." Lawrence was taken aback. He hadn't expected such an offer, especially after the way he had treated Elijah. But the sincerity in Elijah's eyes left no room for doubt. "I'd be honored," Lawrence said, his voice steady. The community celebration. The evening's program began with a speech from Elijah. Standing on a small stage in the center of the gallery, he looked out at the crowd, a mix of artists, patrons, and supporters who had been part of his journey. "This gallery is more than a building," Elijah began. "It's a symbol of what can happen when we believe in each other. When we celebrate our differences, when we give people a chance, we create something extraordinary." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. "I stand here today because of the support of people like Sophia Rousseau, who saw my potential when others didn't. And now, it's my turn to pay it forward. This gallery belongs to the community, to every artist who has a story to tell, and to every person willing to listen." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the space. Elijah's heart swelled with gratitude as he stepped off the stage, greeted by handshakes, hugs, and words of congratulations. Forgiveness and systemic change. Later that night, Elijah and Lawrence stood together, watching as guests admired the art. "You've built something incredible here," Lawrence said quietly. "It's more than a gallery, it's a movement." Elijah nodded. "Art has the power to change the world, Lawrence. But it starts with us, acknowledging our mistakes, learning from them, and doing better." Lawrence glanced at him, a hint of a smile on his face. "You've taught me that, Elijah. I won't waste the second chance you've given me." The event wound down, and as the last guests trickled out, Elijah took a moment to reflect. His journey had been far from easy, but every rejection, every obstacle had led him to this moment. He had turned pain into purpose, using his success to uplift others and challenge the systemic barriers that had once stood in his way. A powerful message. As the gallery lights dimmed, Elijah stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the art that had once been a dream. He thought of his mother, whose unwavering belief in him had sparked this journey, and of the countless artists whose voices would now be heard because of her inspiration. The story of the Resilience Gallery was one of perseverance, forgiveness, and transformation. It was a testament to the power of believing in oneself and in others, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The story of the Resilience Gallery was one of perseverance, forgiveness, and transformation. It was a testament to the power of believing in oneself and in others, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. With a deep breath, Elijah walked out into the night, ready to continue his mission. The world was changing, and he was proud to be a part of that change, one brushstroke, one story, one act of courage at a time.